few weeks after my phone call with Mike, I talked to your team, and they shared with me the theme of today was transformation. And I got it. The interconnective tissue between OneGoal and LinkedIn could not possibly be summed up with a better word than transformation. But let me start my story with the OneGoal story from 11 years ago. These two young women in 2006 were in my classroom. This is Trebecca and Monarchy. And the school that I taught in was called O'Keefe Elementary. There were 800 students in the school, and I got to teach 32 of them sixth grade. At the time, I taught every subject, math, science, reading, etc. In March of that year, almost 11 years ago, we got some really good news. The state exams had come back, and my kids had crushed it. In both math and reading, 31 out of the 32 students had met or exceeded state standards. We were talking about higher education all the time. Parents and guardians were engaged in the classroom. We were closing the achievement gap, or so I thought. Fast forward 4 weeks later. It's a Friday morning. I get up, I get dressed, I go down to my car, and I'm about to get on the road, and I pick up the local newspaper, the Chicago Tribune. I open it up, and this is what it says. At the time, only 6% of incoming ninth graders in the entire district would go on to complete college by their mid-20s. 6. Chicago has 400,000 students in it. It's the third largest district in the United States. This was staggering. If you had asked me the day before, literally if I'd been sitting down with my dad the night before, I've never said a lie to the man in my life, never exaggerated. If he had asked me, how many of your kids do you think are going to complete college? Straight face, I would have said 80 to 90%. And I honestly would have felt like I was downplaying. This data did not represent the capacity and potential of the young people I served, but it was the truth. I remember that morning I walked into my classroom, and we always started the day with the same ritual. We would put a prompt on the screen. It was a critical thinking exercise. And kids would journal for a few minutes, and then we'd discuss. It also gave me an opportunity to take attendance and check in with kids. And I'm walking through the aisles that morning, and I've got my clipboard. And I'm trying to pick out which 2 of my 32 kids are going to have even the most basic chance at the American dream. Needless to say, that morning radically changed my life. Less than a year later, I had joined up with 3 other co-founders, and we had embarked on this new thing called OneGoal. And the idea was that every decision we would make would be acutely focused on one objective: college completion for every single young person. And we did what any set of co-founders would likely do in their first year. We researched, we read, we learned everything that we possibly could about this issue. And I will tell you, when I read this article and I looked at that newspaper, the first impression I had was, this has got to be a local thing. I've been in Chicago long enough to know that there were issues, and I thought this was probably just a Chicago deal. Boy, was I wrong. This graphic shows you what the national degree divide looks like in this country. You'll see that in the entire bottom economic quartile today, or at least a year and a half ago, 9% of students are going to go on to complete college, compared to 77% if you grow up in the highest economic quartile. What's even more staggering, though, is if you look at the other end of this graphic. In a 45-year period in which we have invested billions of dollars in closing this, it's actually widened. And so at OneGoal, what we were trying to understand was this juxtaposition where this was the data and this was the reality, and yet we knew the potential of the kids we served. And when we walked around the country or in our local city, we saw pockets of good stuff going on in this transition between high school and college. We knew there were good programs out there, but this was the reality. One of the enormous blessings in my life is that one of my co-founders is a venture capitalist. And Eddie basically lent us his diligence team for 9 months. And we looked at 800 organizations that were doing this work between high school and college. We found 3 big trends. Here was the first one. You could categorize almost every single intervention or program as either scalable or really effective. There was no nexus between the two. And when you asked why, the primary reason was human capital. You see, in a high school building, your absolute greatest assets are your highest performing teachers. And in any business enterprise, this one included, you usually direct your best assets towards your most critical long-term results. But in high schools, training for and getting to college is often relegated to a final priority within the building. Instead, your best your best assets, your highest performing teachers focus on short-term outcomes, remediation, attendance rates, sometimes standardized test scores. But no one is actively training kids for how they traverse higher education and make the optimal decision. The third thing we found was because of that, this type of work, college prep, was focused on those kids who were willing to raise their hand or stay after school or go downtown to find a mentor. And I am not suggesting, and never will, that that student population does not need or deserve more resources. They do. But I can promise you that that is not going to solve this thing within our lifetime. And that became our obsessive singular mission, was to close the degree divide within our lifetime. And we started with those trends. We said, how do we build a scalable solution leveraging public resources in order to scale? And how do we leverage high-performing teachers as the focal point of the intervention? And can we truly build content and technology that worked for the masses, not the few? We iterated on 13 different models in the first few years, and we landed on the one we use today. And it's so simple, I don't even have a slide for it. We go into a market, and a market for us could be a city like Las Vegas, or it could be a state like Nevada. And we will start to pinpoint high-performing teachers within that market. You can imagine we use tools like LinkedIn and others. Once we identify talent, we recruit those individuals to teach our content and use our technology within their own building, where they have already built social capital and a network and loyalty and trust, and they also have proven outcomes that they can deliver within the classroom. Once we find those educators, they will pinpoint students within the building who need the resources the most. And for 3 full years, the final 2 years of high school and the first year of college, they are tightly buckled together. OneGoal starts as a credit-bearing graded class every day of junior year and every day of senior year of high school. And then the teacher, the kids, and all the content move online during freshman year of college. During that critical transition moment between adolescence and adulthood, we take students that have less than a 10% shot at earning the degree. And in the last 10 years, 82% of our students have seamlessly enrolled in college, and 78% are persisting. And this isn't some little nice charity in some nook or cranny. It started that way. But in the last 10 years, we've grown from serving about 32 kids a year to 9,300 this year across 180 schools in 5 states. So that's the 101. Let me talk about transformation. When I talked to your team and I heard about this concept, what I was so struck by was this idea that it starts with self, it moves to company, and it evolves to the world. The reason I was so struck was how remarkably parallel it was to the way we think about transformational change, which starts at the student level, builds within a cohort to impact an entire school, and then that school becomes part of a larger network to change completion rates in aggregate. Let me walk you through one really simple story to describe this. So I said we're serving about 9,300 students this year. One of those students is this amazing young man named Jaime Reyes. So he right now is a senior in high school at a school called Catalyst, also in Chicago. This young man, when he started with us 3 semesters ago, was a 2.55 GPA. In the first semester in OneGoal, he made it to the honor roll. In the second semester in OneGoal, he made it to the honor roll. In the third semester in OneGoal, he made it to the honor roll. In a 3-semester span, this young man changed his GPA from a 2.55 to almost a 3.3. Now, if you're a math major or took even an algebra class, that cumulative growth in 3 semesters is radical. When Mike was talking about not incremental change, but complete transformation, that's what this young man did. But he is a part of a cohort that is larger than himself. He's partnered with 25 students who go through this journey together. And that cohort is led by this incredible teacher named Sasha Fawaz. And instead of me describing the work that she does, we asked her to put together a very simple, pull up your iPhone and give us a snapshot. So let's click to her video.
As my second chance. I spent the past 10 years in education working to get kids into and through college, but really just thinking that once they get that acceptance letter that they are set and that I have done my job to bring college to our students. But the numbers that I've seen now going through the past 10 years have just been really heartbreaking. And so when I found out about OneGoal and I heard some of their statistics, I just said to myself, like, I have to have that. My kids have to have that. Like, I want to know what it is that they're doing. And as soon as I joined OneGoal, it all made sense. Like, the curriculum, the way that we use data, the resources we have access to, just the systematic approach to college is not something I had really considered in that way before. One of my favorite things about this year is just seeing all the hard work from Y1 pay off. So, we work to get our GPAs up, our ACT scores, raise those, to get our personal statements together, to have our college list. Like, all of that work that happened in Y1 is now paying off. We're sitting at 120 acceptances. Kids who came to me with a 2.6 GPA have 6 or 7 acceptances that I don't know if they would have had without OneGoal. And so I know this is working. I am just the biggest fan of this organization and what they have brought to not only just my kids, but our school environment. It has changed how our school operates and thinks about college. It is really important to me to work with the population that OneGoal works with, because I was one of those students. So I'm a first-generation college student from Detroit, and my parents, although they gave me all of the love and emotional support in the world, they didn't know anything about college. So I was on my own in that area, and I wish I would have had some of these resources to help me get through. And the way I hear my kids talk now after being in OneGoal for a year and a half, you would think that they have had just family that have been in college for generations. They're so knowledgeable, and I know that they are armed with information that I did not have and that a lot of other students do not have that will make them be successful.
We all know that grades, GPA, ACT scores, May 1st, and college is really important, but I think that what's most important is to have those people to support you, and that's what OneGoal does. It's basically a loving family.
I had a 2.8 GPA coming into OneGoal. After 2 years of being with OneGoal, my ACT score grew by 4 points. I have a 19 currently. I have 12 acceptances, and my GPA is a 3.0. The most acceptances out of the whole senior class, and OneGoal always supported me knowing that I have a disability, and they always kept me to keep pushing forward and doing great things.
So one of the very consistent trends amongst our teachers, we serve a couple hundred teachers this year, is this idea of humility. I'm going to call out a couple things that she just brushed by. So Sasha's cohort, 75% of her students are now on the honor roll. We target students that are underperforming academically and non-academically when they walk in. That is not an accident. Number two, $2.3 million in scholarship among 25 students. That is not an accident. The thing she didn't say is that 2 of her 25 kids ran for student council as vice president and president together. They campaigned on a promise of OneGoal, and they caucused with their cohort. They won in a landslide election, and they're now working with their school leader on how they change accountability systems to focus on college completion. If you ever wanted a story of starting with individual transformation and moving to the organization, that's the story. But it doesn't stop there. So Catalyst is one school within our Chicago region. The whole market for us in Chicago is about 100 high schools. That's the number of high schools that need our resources. This year, we're in about 65 of them, and we're anticipating it being close to 80 next year. And in the last decade, the college completion rate that I shared started at about 6.5%. The projection today is 18%. Now, we are not stopping at 18%, nor is anybody at CPS raising their hand and saying we're done. But that aggregate change in that period of time has never happened in the United States. So the idea that you could start with individual transformation, shift to the larger ecosystem of a school, and then build a network to change the world, we see it right here through this one story. But I mentioned when I got on stage that I wanted to share a couple LinkedIn stories before I got off. And let me contextualize it first with one of my favorite quotes ever. This was a coach and a mentor of mine I had a long time ago. His name is Rick Lochner. And this is what he said about transformation. Transformational leaders and organizations are most often the ones that will never know the countless lives that they have changed when no one was looking. Mike, 45 minutes ago talked about integrity and often being the one that making decisions when you don't know about it. What's crazy about your company is you have no idea how much you have changed our organization. Mike doesn't even know it, and he sits on our board. Let me tell you 3 quick stories of how this works. Number 1, you have inspired our organization in ways that you don't know. So about 6 months ago, we were about to write our next 5-year strategic plan. This summer will mark 10 years at OneGoal. And somebody, while I was thinking about this and reflecting on our next stage, sent me this quote. And I will tell you that I had never read this. I suspect you probably have. But when I read it, what was so striking about your founder's words was that transformation often is required when you're on top of your game. See, in the education space, when we talk about transformation, it's usually in the turnaround business. But Reed pushed me and our organization to think about transformation when you have the assets to do it, when things are working, and to be constantly reimagining your work. So we took a really hard look in the mirror and said, are we truly on pace to close the divide within our lifetime? And the answer was no. If we continue to do exactly what we've done for the last 10 years in this next decade, we will not be on pace. And I'm not going to spend the next hour walking through my strategic plan or our strategic plan, but I can tell you that the concept and the root idea is that when we take apart our model and you look at the content or the technology or the training modules, and you compare those individual pieces to our larger sector, they're either best in class or they're in the top 5. But we know that we need to transform each aspect of what we do and make them much more scalable if we can start to serve millions of students a year, not 10,000. Without this quote, I don't think that we would have defined our 5-year strategic plan in the one word, which is now transform. Second way in which your organization has impacted OneGoal is you've connected us. Now, you can tell, I started this conversation talking about talent. You can probably suspect that we use your tools all the time, and we do. But I want to talk about something that is much more profound than how we use your tools to find talent. And it's insane how connected this is to what Mike talked about an hour ago. He mentioned some amazing staff member here that in the 4th of July weekend came back into this organization and started, I think, probably a really meaningful discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That same weekend, I walked back from my break and felt a profound need and desire to have an outlet to share my perspective. And the reason why I decided to post this blog on LinkedIn was because it intimately connects to our professional experience. This was not a commentary that was meant for Facebook as much as we love Facebook. This was truly interconnected to the daily experience of the students that we were serving. Within 48 hours, we had thousands of impressions, but the reason I'm showing you this is because I got an email from one person who read it, and he said 2 things. He said, 1, Jeff, I don't know you, but I disagree. And 2, I want to talk to you about it. Think about the last year we have lived in this country. How rare is it where somebody in any type of respectful professional setting reaches out on anything related to politics or justice in this country and says, I disagree and I want to talk to you about it? Needless to say, that conversation I've had with that man has been transformational for me over the last 7 months. In many ways, it's been life-giving. But the third way in which you've transformed OneGoal, I think, is the most important, and it's this concept of empowerment. Here's the quick story. This is a page of one of our alums, L'Oreal Latimer. I met L'Oreal almost a decade ago when I was the only employee. So of the 4 co-founders, I was the only employee that worked full-time at OneGoal. So you can imagine I was vacuuming carpets, and I was trying to raise money, and I was running the program. And so I got to know the first 30 students or so extremely well. And I met L'Oreal about 10 years ago, and in the first conversation I had with her, I asked her, I said, what do you want to do with your life? And she said one thing, I want to change the world. And if I could scroll down through this page, you'd learn a few things about her. Number 1, she went on to graduate from the University of Illinois. Number 2, she became a Gates Millennium Scholar and got it fully financed. Number 3, she went after that back to her community in Chicago and started working with an extraordinary nonprofit called Chicago Scholars with the single intention of creating college opportunities for other kids. She now moved to DC and is doing the same thing for a different organization in the nation's capital. But that's not why I pulled up her page. I pulled up her page because of what she describes herself as, a dream cultivator and facilitator. If you met L'Oreal, if she was right here, and you talked to her for 90 seconds, that is how you would describe her. You would know that the best way to describe her is not coordinator, manager, some level or some content area. This is her identity. She chose it. She described her story, and then she found an environment that's professionally credible, and now she's a dream cultivator and facilitator. That is transformational change. I want to close out with one final quote, and I recognize the irony in an employment conference, and I've got some unemployed guy up on the screen. And I know that he is today not the President of the United States, but he will always be the 44th President of the United States. And 2 years ago, when he was in the White House, he brought together a group of higher education leaders and K through 12 leaders on a single topic, which was that graphic, the degree divide. What the White House was trying to discern was what were some of the solutions out there that could radically scale. And he decided to close out his speech with the story of OneGoal, and in particular, this young man, Caleb. Caleb is one of the students that we served. He went through his high school, and he's now attending a university called Dominican, and he's learning science. And the president spoke about the experience that he saw when he watched Caleb go through this process. And this is what he said. If we can replicate Caleb's story, imagine what a set of Calebs can do to change the world. Well, Mr. President and friends at LinkedIn, we at OneGoal intend to find that out. Thank you so much.